The day my son-in-law introduced me to his family at his company's grand opening, I learned that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones holding everything together, and that the loudest ones are usually the first to fall apart. I want to tell you something about myself that I've never really talked about publicly. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, in a house where the heat didn't always work in winter, and we stretched a pound of ground beef across 3 dinners. My mother cleaned houses on the north side of Atlanta, and my father drove a delivery truck until his back gave out when I was 14. After that, it was just her and me and my younger sister, making do. That's what we called it, making do. I learned early that complaining was a luxury we couldn't afford. By the time I was in my 40s, I had built something. Not because I was special or brilliant or lucky, because I worked in a way that left no room for anything else. I started small, a single rental property in East Point that I bought for next to nothing after the 2008 crash, then another, then a small commercial space in College Park that I leased to a dry cleaner, then a warehouse, then a strip of storefronts in a neighborhood that everyone else had written off. I never talked about it. I drove the same 10-year-old Buick until the transmission went. I wore sensible shoes and kept my hair simple and grocery shopped with coupons clipped from the Sunday paper. My daughter, she's the only child I have. Her father and I divorced when she was 9, and I raised her alone after that. I worked nights sometimes and weekends, and I missed things I am not proud of having missed. But I kept the lights on and kept her in good schools and made sure she never went without. I thought that was enough. I thought love was something you proved through showing up, through sacrifice, through doing the hard thing over and over until it became habit. I don't know when she started being ashamed of me. I suspect it was gradual, the way most painful things are. She was always smarter than me in certain ways, quicker with words, more comfortable in rooms full of people. She got a scholarship to a school in Virginia and came back different. Not bad different, just polished in ways I hadn't taught her. She started dating a man named Vincent, who worked in real estate development and wore suits that cost more than my first rental property. His family had money going back 2 generations. Old money, the kind that doesn't need to explain itself. I tried to like him. I cooked for him when he came to the house. I asked him questions about his work and listened carefully to the answers. I noticed that he never asked me anything about mine. They got engaged after 2 years. My daughter called me, excited and breathless, and I cried happy tears in my kitchen with my hand over my mouth so she wouldn't hear me. I told her I loved her. I told her I was proud of her. I meant both things completely. The wedding planning was where things started to crack at the seams. His mother had opinions about everything. The venue had to be a certain hotel in Buckhead, not because it was my daughter's favorite, but because their family had held events there for 30 years. The menu had to be approved by his grandmother. The guest list was reviewed and culled like it was a corporate document. I was included in exactly one meeting, and when I offered a suggestion about flowers, just one small thing, the room went quiet in a way that felt like a door closing. My daughter looked at me from across the table, and I could see it in her eyes. That look, the one that said, "Please don't." I said nothing. I sat back. I folded my hands in my lap and let it go. The morning of the wedding, I drove myself to the hotel in my Buick. I had bought a dress, navy blue, simple, good fabric. I did my own hair. I wore the pearl earrings my mother had given me before she passed. I thought I looked fine. I thought I looked like someone's mother at a wedding, which is exactly what I was. The ceremony was beautiful. My daughter was luminous. I cried again, standing in the front pew, and this time I didn't try to hide it. The reception was where it happened. Vincent's family had a tradition. Before the formal dinner began, the fathers and mothers of the couple were introduced to the assembled guests. His father was introduced first, a real estate developer, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. Applause. His mother was introduced, a former school board member active in 3 charitable organizations. Applause. Then Vincent stood at the microphone and smiled the smile of a man who has never been told no. He said, "And now I'd like to introduce my new mother-in-law." He paused. He looked over at me, and something shifted in his face. something that wasn't quite humor, but was close to it. Everyone, this is the woman my wife grew up with. She drove here tonight in a car older than some of your appetizers. Light laughter from the tables. I kept my face still. She's a little rough around the edges, but she's family now. That's what my wife keeps telling me. More laughter, louder this time. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the tablecloth. Vincent's uncle, a man named Arthur, who I would learn later was the majority financial partner in Vincent's development company, was seated 2 tables to my left. He had arrived late. I had not been introduced to him. He had not seen my face until that moment. He stood up from his chair. The room didn't notice at first, but I did. I watched him stand very slowly, the way a man stands when he is choosing his next words carefully. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that comes from decades of knowing exactly who you are. He looked at Vincent. Then he looked at me. I watched his face change. He said, "Vincent." Just that. One word. But the way he said it made the room go quiet. "Do you know who this woman is?" Vincent laughed, uncertain now. "She's my mother-in-law, Uncle Arthur." I just said, "No." His uncle's voice was quiet and flat and final. "Do you know who she is?" I will be honest with you. I had recognized Arthur the moment he walked in. I've been working with his attorney for 11 months on the acquisition of a commercial corridor in a development district on the west side of Atlanta. Arthur's company needed a partner with existing holdings in that corridor. I was that partner. The deal was worth close to $18 million, and it was scheduled to close in 6 weeks. He had never met me in person. All of our negotiations had gone through attorneys and a property manager named Tessalia, who worked for me and who, like most people who worked for me, didn't advertise who she worked for. I had thought about saying something when I arrived. I had decided not to. I told myself it was because I didn't want to cause a scene at my daughter's wedding. But I think, if I'm being honest, I wanted to see how this would go. I wanted to see what kind of man my daughter had married when he thought no one was watching. Now I had my answer. Arthur crossed the room. He extended his hand to me. "Lorraine," he said, because that is my name, and he had heard it many times in the past 11 months, just never connected it to the woman sitting in front of him. "I am so sorry. I didn't realize. I should have. I'm sorry." I shook his hand. I said, "It's a beautiful wedding." He turned to Vincent. I have never seen a man's face drain the way Vincent's did in that moment. It was like watching something dissolve. "This woman," Arthur said, and his voice was very even, "controls more commercial real estate in this city than most developers will see in a career. I have been trying to close a deal with her company for almost a year, and you just—" He stopped. He looked at his nephew for a long moment. "We'll talk later." He went back to his seat. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then the band started playing again, and a server appeared with champagne, and the evening moved on. The way evenings do, carrying everything along with it whether you're ready or not. I ate my dinner. I danced once with a man from Vincent's father's side who asked politely and didn't say anything offensive. I watched my daughter from across the room, and she watched me, and neither of us moved toward the other. She came to my table just before 11. She sat down in the empty chair beside me, and for a moment she didn't say anything. I let the silence sit. I had learned a long time ago that silence does its own work if you give it enough room. Finally she said, "Mom, I didn't know he was going to say that." I looked at her. She was still in her gown, and her makeup had worn down to something closer to her real face, and she looked young in a way that broke something open in my chest. "I know," I said. "I should have." She stopped. When he said it, "I should have said something." "Yes," I said, "you should have." I didn't say it with anger, just with the weight of it, because that was the thing that hurt more than anything Vincent had said into that microphone. My daughter knew her husband was a certain kind of man, and she had decided that keeping the peace in that room mattered more than standing up for her mother. That was the calculation she had made, right there in front of everyone, and I had watched her make it. "I'm sorry," she said, and she started to cry, quietly, in the way she had cried as a little girl with her shoulders pulling inward. I put my hand on her arm. I said, "I love you. That doesn't change." But love and trust are not the same thing, and I think she knew that I was not making a promise about the latter. In the weeks that followed, I went back to work. The deal with Arthur's company moved forward. We closed on schedule, and he sent flowers to my office, a gesture I appreciated for its simplicity. At the closing, he apologized again, more formally, and I told him that I was glad we had finally met in person. He said, "You could have said something that night. It would have been your right." I thought about that. My daughter was getting married, I said. It wasn't the moment. He nodded. "You're a more patient person than I would have been." I told him it wasn't patience. I told him it was something I had learned growing up in a house where you didn't always have the luxury of reacting the way you wanted to in the moment. You filed things away. You let them settle. And then, when the time was right, you acted from a position of clarity instead of heat. What I didn't tell him was that it had cost me, that patience cost something every time, that the morning after the wedding I had sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it, and I had let myself feel all of it, every word, every moment. My daughter looked away, every second of laughter from people who thought they knew what I was worth by looking at me. I sat with it until it became something I could carry instead of something that was carrying me. Vincent called me 6 days after the wedding. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that was long on words and short on meaning. I listened to it once and didn't call back. My daughter called me the following Sunday, the way she always had, the way we had talked every Sunday since she left for college. We talked about small things first. The weather, a recipe she was trying, a show she had started watching. And then, near the end of the call, she said, "Vincent wants to apologize to you, in person." I said, "I know. Will you let him?" I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about what was true versus what was easy. "Your husband can apologize to me when he understands what he actually did," I said. "Not when he understands that I have money and he needs to manage the relationship. There's a difference, and I need him to know it too." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's fair. I love you," I said. "I love you too, Mom." 3 months after the wedding, Arthur sat across from me at lunch and mentioned, almost in passing, that Vincent's development project on the West Corridor had run into financing issues. A lender had pulled out. A partner had restructured. The project was not in crisis, but it was no longer the sure thing it had been. I listened. I didn't offer anything. That was not my doing. I want to be clear about that. I did not pull strings or make calls or leverage anything I had. I have spent my entire professional life refusing to let money become a weapon, because once you do that, you become the kind of person who deserved to be kept small in the first place. But I also didn't go out of my way to help. And there's something I had to sit with honestly. Did Vincent's project struggle because of the market? Or did the universe have a sense of timing? I genuinely don't know. Some things you don't get to understand cleanly. What I know is this. I know that I drove home from that closing in a car I finally replaced, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had decided it was time. I bought something quiet and good, the kind of car that doesn't announce itself. I drove through neighborhoods I used to walk through, and I thought about the girl who stretched ground beef 3 ways and learned to keep her reactions private and her plans longer term than most people thought necessary. I know that my daughter comes to see me on the first Sunday of every month now. Sometimes she brings Vincent. He shakes my hand carefully, like he is handling something fragile. I serve them coffee and I ask about their lives and I listen without giving away what I'm thinking. I have not forgiven him the way movies want you to forgive people, with a speech and a moment and tears on both sides. I have simply decided that my daughter matters more than my grievance, and so I make room. But I have not forgotten, and I have not pretended. I know that the women in my mother's church would call what happened to me at that reception a humiliation. They would be right. It was meant to be one. Vincent stood at that microphone and reduced me to a punchline because he had decided from the beginning that I was the kind of woman who could safely be reduced. What he miscalculated, what people like him always miscalculate, is that the women who were humiliated into silence for years are the same women who learned in that silence exactly how to build something they could never take away. I don't need anyone in that room to know my net worth. I don't need a microphone or a moment or a vindication that everyone can see. I just needed to know that when the night was over, I drove home to something I built with my own hands, walked into a house I own entirely, and slept without owing anyone an explanation. That's not revenge. That's just the life I made while they weren't paying attention. And I've learned to be very, very comfortable with the fact that they were not paying attention. That was always the point. I have thought about that night more times than I can count. Not with bitterness. I want to be clear about that, but with the kind of slow, careful attention you give to something that changed the shape of you without asking permission first. What Vincent did at that microphone was not unusual. That's the part people miss. Men like him do that kind of thing every day, in boardrooms and dinner tables and family gatherings across this country. They look at a woman who is quiet and plainly dressed and driving an old car, and they make a decision about her value before she has said a single word. The cruelty isn't even personal, most of the time. It's just habit. It's what happens when someone has never once had to reckon with being wrong about a person. What I keep coming back to is this. The life I built did not happen because I was angry. It happened because I was honest with myself about what I had and what I didn't have, and I worked from that truth every single day for decades. There was no shortcut. There was no moment of inspiration. There was just a discipline of showing up to the hard meetings, the bad deals, the properties no one else wanted, the relationships I had to tend quietly over years before they became anything useful. That kind of persistence is not dramatic. Nobody makes a speech about it, but it is the only thing in my experience that actually compounds. When Arthur stood up in that room and said my name, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. And then I felt something quieter than triumph, something closer to clarity, because the reversal that everyone in that room witnessed was not the story. The story was the 30 years before it. The story was every morning I got up before anyone else was awake and made a decision to be smarter than my circumstances, to read the contract carefully, to ask the question that made the room uncomfortable, to know when to speak, and this is the part that took me longest to learn, when to let the silence do the work instead. My daughter is still finding her way back to me. It is slow and some Sundays are easier than others. I don't hold what she did against her the way I once thought I would. She was in a room full of people she wanted to impress and she chose wrong. That is a human failure, not a permanent one. What I do hold on to is the expectation that she will do better, not because I am wealthy, not because Arthur recognized me, but because doing right by the people who built you from nothing is the only kind of integrity that means anything when the rest of it falls away. That is what I would want anyone to take from what happened to me. Not the twist, not the money, the part that came before, the part where I decided a very long time ago that my character had to be something I could stand behind even when no one was looking and nothing was paying off yet. That decision, made in a small house in Decatur with the mother who cleaned other people's floors, is the only reason any of the rest of it was possible. The room laughed at me. Then the room went quiet. I drove home to something I built, and I slept without owing anyone an explanation. That has always been enough.